Okay, so ClassDojo, new component library plan. So I've been here for a little while and things have been, going. So now's a good time to, show people what's going on, where we're at. So let's see. So the new component library plan. Just zoom in on this a little bit. All right, so the long-term goal is to build a unified component model that's shared across all of design and product development. The idea is that we can move significantly faster across all workflows and platforms and disciplines. We have a shared conceptual model, as well as a not necessarily a shared implementation, but at least a shared conceptual implementation, so that the same component is the same component everywhere. That's the dream. Anyway, long term. So, for example, Facebook interface guidelines. So I was on that team briefly, on and off, design tools, and that sort of thing. And it was all about, it was creating a component library. So unifying things, not just from a design standpoint, but from an implementation standpoint. It started out, it was all, based in Photoshop, and so out of that project came Framer. The guys that started Framer were originally in the Facebook interface guidelines team. They left, started Framer, and it is where it's at now. Talk more about that in a minute. And at the time, Sketch was still brand new, so it wasn't really being used by anybody. I'm not sure if it even existed, actually. Yeah, I don't think it existed. So we built out a bunch of design tools and scripts, and I built like a custom Mac app, something kind of heading towards the direction of Framer X, where the whole goal would be so that you could share the component concepts across all platforms. This is before React Native. And then they started actually implementing those components across all the different platforms, Android, iOS, web, and React Native. And then they also built out a bunch of design libraries. First, there was a design toolkit for Photoshop, and then a design toolkit for Sketch. And then eventually it became a whole design tools team where they built out plugins for Sketch and various other things, so that you could just, with a couple of taps, just drop in any pre-canned component. I built out a way that you could render real live React components into Photoshop or Quartz Composer, which was what everybody was using for doing prototyping at the time. But now, kind of the direction that that's going, it looks like Framer X is going to be kind of the go-to thing there, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. So let's see. So we've got, that's the basic concept, but of course, that's a big thing. We're not getting all that done in a few weeks or a few months. It's like, it was a big project by many people over the course of a long time. So, it's been a while that you guys have been working on a component design system. It's been there for a while, but it's taken a while to actually dedicate the engineering resources. It's not tied to some specific product or some specific deliverables that can focus on implementing this thing and exploring it and that sort of thing. So that's why I'm here. So the overview of the process. First, observe before deciding on what to do, before picking a direction, before I come in and just tell everybody what I think should be done. Right? Who am I? I don't know how you guys work. It's like gathering facts and details. First, just gathering everything and then organizing. And then gathering in all the options, what's possible given where we're at right now. There's the there's where we're at right now, where we want to go, and then planning the specific steps in order to get from point A to point B. All the different options that you can take, all the different paths that you can take, and then organizing those, eliminating the obviously, or not obvious, untractable paths, the paths that lead off of a cliff, the paths that just technically won't work out, and eliminating it down to only the paths that would actually work, and then as a team working on deciding which path to take and the specific steps in order to actually go down that path. So that brings us to the decide phase, where we prioritize. First, starting from my perspective, researching the code, the commit history, doing interviews of seeing the perspectives of all the individual people who are relevant to the component library, at least. Ideally interviewing all the product developers and all the designers as well, but time for that later. And then there's the make it work phase, which is what we're in the middle of now. Coming up towards the end of the exploration phase, headed into the actual getting crap done phase, which is of course the most exciting part, because I like to get stuff done. So the first step is to make it work. So here's all the, we've gathered and prioritized and organized, yada, yada, yada. Now we make it work. First, make it work for me. Making sure that I understand how to build something that actually works, make it work on my machine, make it work on other people's machines, and then kind of a much longer process is how do we make it work for everyone? So, like here's an example of how it works, what some prototype code that's put together, but mostly focused on the not end user experience, the end experience for our target audience for the component library, which is the designers and the product developers. So from their perspective, what's the experience like, and does it actually get us closer to solving that big North Star problem? Obviously we're not going to get all the way there in a few months, but we can make a lot of progress. So we're living in the future now. We don't have to do it the hard way that we did it with Fig back at Facebook Innovation Conference. So we can save a lot of work there. So making it work for everyone. So an informal proposal of how to do it everywhere, and then we work together to actually decide which options to pick, and then work together to define the standards, write up the documentation, write up the examples, etc. So let's dive into the details. Blah, 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 lots of status. Okay, so observing the facts and details, gather and organize. So there's the existing production product. Looking over the design spec. So there is no design spec for the current production product. So gathering in the design files of all existing product features, organizing those, all the design files and components and visual patterns are available. And there is a component library, which is fantastic. Using React helps a lot. And then looking at the actual product. So screenshots of everything, screencast videos of all the product features on iPhone and Android. And then looking at the new design system, the design spec, documentation, the design files, getting access to everything, and then looking at the actual product features that are built with the new design, if there are any, and going from there. There, now I can see my pretty face. Anyway. So, talking to the designers, the design was built based on the iOS look and feel. So the iOS app is kind of the the bar that we're shooting for across the board in a lot of look and feely sort of ways. So why is this hard? Since we didn't have a design spec for the existing product, took some extra work to organize all the real world production visual patterns. So why is this necessary? Why do we even need to do all this? So before we know exactly what components or layouts to implement, it's essential to know what we already have, how it's being used, and how frequently we're using stuff. So before we dive into the code and like, okay, let's work on component X, we have to know like what is the cost benefit of that. So say we fix this thing, does it actually get us closer to our goal or not? Or is it just like optimization, which is important. Optimization is very important to runtime performance and all that stuff. But we want to make sure that we're measuring twice and cutting once. So observing options, gathering and organize. So first we keep track of all the random ideas and possibilities that come up. Then we organize those options and eliminate any ludicrously unworkable options, narrowing it down to a few actually workable options. Finally, we look through the actually workable options as a team and make a decision. Then we document the decision with context and move on. We should not revisit the decision again unless something big comes up later. So some of those things are like doing TypeScript versus Flow for the client side, just looking into the industry, like who's using what, where, and when, and why. And as far as I've seen, asking people, polling people, looking at the actual charts and stats and all that stuff. Flow is a tiny minority. The majority of people who are writing typed JavaScript are using TypeScript. That is the standard. It's even being used in Framer X, which is fantastic. So I incorporated that into prototype, which is a wonderful, wonderful developer experience. Gives you autocomplete. You don't have to write all the boilerplate code with the prop types and everything. You get a lot of that stuff for free just by typing things on the model layer. And you can import those types and get a lot of really fantastic developer experience advancement for free. And another huge advantage of that is that since Framer X is also using TypeScript, that means that if we properly, annotate our components, we can use those as is in the designing interfaces and developing prototypes. They're using production components, production React components that have full integration with the UI and everything. We're living in the future. It's wonderful. So anyway, so the sorts of things that we're going to have to cover eventually is defining what tech we use, what libraries we use, what platforms we're focused on, what techniques we're using, what architectures we care about, the specific like human processes of how we're doing this, the syntax that we're writing everything in, the structure of how we're building everything, etc. These are to be defined later as a team, etc. So why do we do it this way? Why do we have a separate gather and organize phase? And why are we deciding separate from the gathering and the organizing? Wouldn't it be so much easier to just like make the decision already? We've done the gathering, you have all the context in your head, make the decision, move on. Because we want to maximize the variety, we want to make sure that we're using the best options, but we also want to maximize our certainty and minimize chaos and waste the least amount of time. Like that's one of the high-end North Star goals, is to unify everything. So if one random contractor says, okay, we're doing it this way, boom, done, and then he's out of there, 3 years later, everybody's gonna constantly be be questioning those decisions, and it's just going to be a point of discussion forever. Like, I worked at a place one time where the hot topic of discussion was tabs or spaces. They couldn't decide as a team to go tabs or spaces, and arguments. There were arguments for months about tabs versus spaces instead of like shipping the product. This must have been like a decade ago now. Anyway, so we want to minimize the chaos. We waste the least amount of time, and we own the decisions as a team. Let me highlight that. We own the decisions as a team. No cowboys. Everyone gets a voice before the decisions get made. That's critical because as a team, we want to be a team. We want to decide things as a team. We want to own the decisions. We don't want, drama and politics and warfare and all this stuff. I'm not insinuating or thinking that might be a problem here. I assume it's not. But, we want to make sure that going forward long term, we do the hard work to consider the options, make the right decisions, and then stick with those decisions for long enough that it was worth the effort, long enough that we can actually get closer to that goal of moving faster. Because, at the end of the day, who cares whether it's TypeScript or Flow, tabs versus spaces, semicolons or not? Who cares? It doesn't matter. What matters is that you make a decision, you stick with it, and you don't debate it constantly. So you can move on with life. But it does matter. Like, TypeScript is better than Flow for lots of reasons. It's way more popular, so way more people are going to already know it. The API side of things has already moved in that direction. It's like, this is not a debate. Anyway, that's just a for instance. So, deciding priorities. So that's, interviewed people. So, I have my own personal opinions of what I could focus on, but, who cares what I think? Let's figure out what everybody cares about and then do the right thing according to the tribe. The values of the tribe, let's say. So, then we decide the priority, research, calculate the cost benefit of the existing code. Not a lot of I didn't generate all the reports for this yet. That's like in progress, but it was conclusive enough that like we need to move on and not spend so much time on the research side of things. We can calculate that more later once we have a better idea of the kind of component decisions. Once some of those decisions have been made, we can circle back around and see what we can do as far as like doing code mods and automatically improving some of this stuff, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on this sort of thing. This is something that's going to be, it's not like one kind of block of time, it's like a recurring sort of thing. So, for example, red flags that come up are files that get modified frequently by multiple people. Maybe that file needs to get split up into subcomponents. That's an example of what you would discover doing this process. So the prototype. Decide how to make it work for me. So prototype a revamp of the portfolio stuff, adhere to the new design system, explore available options, get a good personal feel for what needs to be done and my personal preferences on how to make it work, and then deliver the working prototype code as well as personal insights and experience going into the next part of the process. So in design run, blah, blah, blah. So, okay, so specific recommendations. So we want to stay in sync with FramerX and the React Sketch.app if possible, so that if we can only support one, choose FramerX, and then keep everything universal as much as is reasonable. So I'm going to dive into the details of universal rendering of what is that? Why is that a thing? Why do we care? What are the alternatives, and like what does that give us, etc. Separate. But suffice it to say, if you do that, it'll get us closer to that goal. Ultimately, we want to have some sort of universal rendering because that's the whole idea. But the specific implementation and libraries and options that we choose to get there, and like when we do that, that's lots of discussion and details for later. So so that's my recommendation. Keep everything universal as much as is reasonable. I dove into a couple of different ways of doing that, of actually implementing that. There's React Native DOM, React Native Web, and what's it called? React, whatever. It's the thing that's used by the guy from Airbnb who wrote the Sketch app integration stuff. Basically, I checked that thing out, and it's not ready for prime time. It's a little buggy. There are too many issues. I checked out React Native Web. It was better, solved all those problems. I looked into React Native DOM, and it's a much more ambitious project. It's just not applicable for us. It's overkill. I highly recommend we do not go with that. React Native Web basically came out as the only current universal rendering option that's worth considering. The only workable option. So the choice there is, should we try to go with that now, or should we just like pick and choose individual like pieces from that to use now, and think about getting to the real thing later? Like that decision ultimately, I mean that's a separate discussion. Anyway, so TypeScript. Oh yeah, React primitives. That's the name. So yeah. So and then some random stuff about how to do how to organize your React components. I'll dive into that later. So standards. This is where we want to go over the next few weeks to months to years. Is continue iterating on this stuff. Kind of two separate tracks. Standards. How do we make this work for everybody? So we have a library of our components. We have documentation for the specific components that we have, as well as the like how to propose a new component, how to implement a new component, how to explore a one-off component or export a one-off component into the library. So so like how to propose a new component. Like why is this a thing that we'd have to consider? So like when a designer is building up some new interface, by default we want them to be picking from the existing component library and just using predefined components in predefined ways, because then the UIs that they design can be implemented very, very quickly. There's no new components to build, no major new things to do. You just have to boom, slap this design together, wire it up to data, check all your behaviors, make sure everything works, ship it, and you're good. But sometimes there might be a need to do something in the UI that just has never been done before for whatever reason, and maybe we need a one-off component, or we need to make some existing component do something slightly different. That's when we want to have a process for proposing new components, and that will help us to keep that consistency and that what's it called? Hoot. I had a word for that. Our certainty. That'll help us keep our certainty that things will be stable and that we can continue to move quickly. If we don't have that process, if anybody in the product development and product design is able to just like come up with new components willy-nilly with no process, then we're just going to have a ton of new components, and it's just going to slowly, death by a thousand cuts, bog down the workflow and the process. And like the whole purpose of this is to avoid that. So we have to have processes like this. As much as it pains me to add any kind of red tape to anybody's life, it avoids so many other problems. Anyway, so topics to discuss. Lots of topics to discuss. Universal rendering. Talked about that a little bit. I'm going to do a write-up. One of the things we really want to consider is the maintenance plan. We want to maximize certainty, so we need to know who owns maintenance of this. Like React Native Web, if we choose to go with that, like is that being actively maintained? What are the future prospects for that? Like, is it going to be abandoned and then it's on us to like maintain this thing? How much does it actually cost as far as time and effort and whatever to use it in the real world? Like, that's the kind of the process that I'm working on now, is trying to answer those questions before I do the write up. Need to answer those basic questions, because there's like, that's really the decision point, is if it's too hard to maintain it, or if it's too hard to integrate it into our code base right now, then it's just it's something to do later. That's basically what my recommendation will be. If we can do it now without too much pain, we probably should. Maybe look at the details and decide. If we can't, then we should not let it be a blocker for us, and we should just move on. But there's way more to talk about separately. And then the CSS and JavaScript options. There's a million options. I looked into all the options and how they work and the maintainability of them. It looks like so the two big ones. I kind of narrowed it down to basically 3 options. React Native Web, which is fantastic, because it comes with its own kind of thing for that, which is exactly the same as React Native, and then there's only one concept to learn. But it's, we don't want the product developers to really have to deal with the CSS and JavaScript library. We want that encapsulated away, and only the people actually developing the components and iterating on those, which should be the product developers as well. They should be empowered to, change the library as they see fit. That's why we have pull requests, right? But they shouldn't have to deal with that on day-to-day basis in order to get stuff done. So we don't want a bunch of like random proprietary stuff as part of the day-to-day process. We want to own that, encapsulate it, simplify it, hit of success it as much as possible. So whichever one we go with there shouldn't really impact the product developers. So it's not critical that we make a decision on that before we move forward with the product developer and product designer facing stuff. So that's why I've been focused on that stuff more so. And then animation, looking into all the animation options. There's still work that needs to be done for that, because Framer X just came out, and they have kind of their own way of doing that. I'm not sure exactly what the roadmap is there. If any of that stuff is like going to be useful for production. But that's definitely something that we want to nail down eventually. It's not a blocker right now because there isn't a lot of animation in the design that we have to like get implemented right now. But it's something that we need to think about sooner than later, because based on kind of the techniques that you use to animate, you'll structure the components in different ways. Whether you use set native props to set the animation properties, or maybe you're transitioning between 2 predefined style objects, and you're just kind of transitioning between those. That's kind of how React Animated, and which works on React Native and Web and Framer X, does similar things. So that's the top contender right now. There's also I forget what it's called, Pop or Push or something like that looked really, really good. I think that's by the people who did Green Sock, which was kind of the top tier animation library for probably 10 years. I'm not sure who's working on that, but it's it's seen a lot of love. Is that green talk? I gotta look into that again. But that basically those are the two options. It's animated and all the the different platform specific flavors of that, and whatever that thing was called that I forget the name of, but I know what it is. I'll Google it for you. Anyway, so priorities going forward, or priorities for the sprint that we're coming towards the end of now is like basic component like card. I got that. Layout component so we can discuss the API. Got that. And some responsive design. Got that as well as like documenting this the discussions, the learnings that we've had so far. So this this discussion is part of that, as well as the the document we've been walking through. Hopefully everybody has access to all this stuff. I posted the links, but I'll post them again. And then we have separate docs for diving into the details of all this stuff. And there you go. So let me show you the components, kind of the prototype stuff that it is so far. It's not, we're not shipping this tomorrow. This is, prototype. So just showing off some basic responsiveness, the skinniness changes. So you can highlight updates to see the kind of performance model of this. So it's only re-rendering when it actually changes that value. Let me show you how that works. Okay, so this is over here. Okay, let me just boost the old font size so you can see what's now. Alright. And there we go. So we've got first of all, everything's using TypeScript, so you get the get to see what type of stuff all this stuff is. I'm saying stuff that much is sort of confusing. All right. Let's see. So we've got the portfolio grid cell. So instead of hiding all of the logic for doing the grid cells inside of some other component, inside some other file, you want it all kind of at the top level so you can see everything at a certain conceptual layer in one file. And you should encapsulate the implementation details for how you do that thing, but you want to actually do that thing in full sight. So we're, instead of saying portfolio grid and then a separate file that has a portfolio grid and then a separate file that you do it all here, do the data fetching at this level, and then the portfolio grid cell is just kind of a dumb component that you pass values into, like URLs and text and stuff, as you see here. So then there's this row component, which is an example of some of the different ways of doing layout. Row, it's like basically a flexbox view with well, let's just dive into it. So control click and VS Code can jump you straight to the implementation. So there's make layout with style. It's a helper that helps make layout things. So we're using a view component, which is essentially on the web. It's essentially a div with a bunch of predefined styles on it and a bunch of predefined logic to kind of mimic the behavior of the base view component on React Native, so that you only have to learn one kind of conceptual model and then you can use it everywhere. So we've got the you're passing in different things like no flex, no wrap. So I went back and forth on whether to wrap by default or no wrap by default. And by default, you usually want things to wrap to a new line. It's just like, it's the least surprising thing. So when you don't want that behavior, you should explicitly specify it. Or maybe we should go with a separate component to specify that specific behavior. That's a point of discussion, is whether you want a bunch of different components that do very specific things, or if you want to pass in a bunch of properties to one kind of generic component to change the behavior of that thing. Kind of the logic there is you kind of want to strike the balance at a conceptual level and not at a behavioral level, or at, you don't want to get too specific with the individual components. You want, like, as you're designing or developing a thing, like, what was that thing called again? You shouldn't have to just you shouldn't have to like go look at the documentation. You should just know, okay, I want these things to flow horizontally in a row, so I'll use a row. Like, oh, now that I've got it, I need it on here. It's like wrapping to a new line. I need to stop that. So let me see what use code completion to see what properties are available on view. Like, oh, okay, no wrap, boom, done. You don't have to look up documentation. It's all inline. It's all contextual documentation, and that's good. So, and then there's this space component that you can see here. So if there's a gap passed in, let me jump back to the app. So yeah, so we set the gap to either medium or large. Now we're not passing a specific number in here because the numbers, all the constants, are defined within the component library system and not exposed to the individual product developers. They get to choose from the available sizes, small or extra small, small, medium, large, extra large, maybe extra, extra large, I don't know. But that allows us to redefine those specific sizes later without having to code mod our entire code base. And, the relative differences between a medium gap and a medium space and all these things should be kept forever. So they need to be properly defined now. We can tweak the specific details later, but the relative differences between them needs to be locked down. Otherwise, if we ever change that stuff, we have to rebuild everything, and I don't do that. So let's see. Notice there's a scroll view component that's straight out of like React Native Web. It's basically, you want to be extremely intentional and explicit with what parts of your UI are allowed to scroll and what parts are not. And then there's like a title component, which is for text. You jump into that, you can see, make text render style. Jump to that, make text render style. This is it's a dumb component, no logic or state or anything. That essentially just takes the default style and, whether you want to flex it or not. And then it takes a type. So for example, you've got an action, here are the available types on it, and then what's the style difference in those things. This is all like implementation detail stuff that component or product developers aren't going to have to really deal with. And I love the back button VS Code. How have I lived without these apps for so long? It's so good. Anyway, so this is kind of a brief. Okay, let me look at portfolio grid cell. Is another dumb component. No logic, no data, no state, no nothing. But it's notice everything here is optional. So like if you don't pass in the image, it still renders everything else. It doesn't throw an error or anything. Everything's kind of safe by default. So let me show you what happens if I just take out the images. Okay. So I take out the image from there. Boom. Save. And so it all still renders. Same exact thing. It just doesn't render the image. Okay. I mean, I don't know if that's the logic that we want for this component specifically, but it's just an example of what you can do and what kind of happens differently based on some basic, whether you send this value in or not changes how it's rendered. So change that. Only don't include the profile image and see what happens there. It's like it all still works. No detail text, and it all still works. No body. Still works. We should probably make that like, if you don't include the body, maybe align the text vertically with the guy. Let's do that right now. See what happens. Okay, so you included a profile image, but you did not include detail. So row. How do you do that? So let's switch React to this to select. Okay. This to select. Oh no, I'm doing the wrong thing. Derp. Let's just select that. Okay, boom. So text. Body text is flex true. So we need to like vertically align this stuff. So let's just throw a style in there. See what happens. Align self. Enter. Does that work? No. Okay. I want justify self. Justify yourself. Justify content. That's it. Nope. I don't remember. I gotta go look up the documentation for how to flex bugs. But it's an example of of how super amazing TypeScript is. Get all that autocomplete jazz. It's good times. Anyway, so yeah, these space components, like what's going on with the space components? Why do we have that as like a component versus like passing it into these separate components? Well, you can do it either way. The difference is the complexity. If you think of a space as being a separate thing, it's really, really simple. You have it there or not. You have it there and you set a specific size on it. Let's say size equals large. Let's see what happens now. That only applies if the text is longer, so that's not a good place to see that. Let's put a large one there. Profile pic. So that's under the profile. Oh, that's next to the profile pic. Okay. Anyway, you get the idea. So it's like I'm pointing. You can't see my finger pointing. Anyway, it's like right next to the profile picture. Just set that large, and then we don't have to muddy up the detail text component or all the other text components with like taking margin and like how do we define that? It's like, I mean, we could do that. That's an option. I mean, it's a solvable problem, right? There's different ways of doing this. But if you do a space component, it's just easier. It's just simpler. You can use your regular logic to include it or not. So if you've never seen this syntax here, this it's an empty React native or React component JSX tag thing. It's a fragment. So the latest version of React, I think React 16 point something, or is it just 6? I don't remember. Introduced a way to return multiple components or multiple React elements from in a thing without having to do an array and then use the key property or like stick it inside of a div or whatever and just muddy up your space. It just lets you return multiple components. It just cleans things up. I'll just not good at explaining this stuff off the top of my head. I linked to the documentation. Also, you might notice that I'm using a font that renders this stuff like as a separate glyph. So it's actually, you know, not equals, but it renders it like that. I think it's Fira code. It's lovely. I highly recommend. Okay, I'm getting off topic now. So accessibility traits, that's a big deal. So one of the advantages of using React Native Web is that they're using the exact same accessibility model that was defined at Facebook for React Native. So that you only have to learn one kind of conceptual model for how to do accessibility kind of across the board, and it works the same way in React Native on iOS, Android, and if you use React Native Web, same concepts apply on web. We don't necessarily need to use React Native Web in order to get that, but we get it for free if we use that. So here I'm defining that the portfolio grid cell is a button. So you get, you know, the tap behavior and stuff, and you can like tab between it. You get all the keyboard behaviors by default. If I had anything hooked up, to the like the on press or on click or whatever it's called, you'd see the events firing. You get a lot of stuff for free. Yeah, what else? Yeah, React Node. I'm using React Node here as the type for the title and the detail and stuff. The reason why is that allows you to pass in any kind of React thing. You can either pass in text or you can pass in an actual React element or a fragment full of React elements, and it all just works, which is very useful. So if we wanted to like reuse this component instead of just allowing text, like you know where it says 5 minutes there, if we wanted to allow them to just put in any old React element in there, then all you have to do is change it from being, you know, detail text to something else. Maybe check to see what type of React node that is, and then like if it's just a string, then pass that as the children to detail text. But if it is a regular node, then just render it as is. But as it is right now, you can nest text components with text elements within text elements. So that you can do like this string of text and like this word full, stuff like that. Let's see, I'm starting to scrape the bottom of the barrel here. No, you get the text thing. There's some examples of text. I'll scroll down and see that. All the different, you know, types of the text. You can see, you know, delete, and then you, boom, you get the autocomplete for the different types of text stuff. Yeah, you can pass in children prop, or you can actually use children. Same deal. Yeah, so that's good. Oh yeah, the way React Native Web works is you just require things from React Native, and then as a part of the build step, it replaces it with React Native Web before it builds it for web. Boop. So yeah, here's the layout components. I've got, let's see. Oh yeah, here's the on layout thing. This is this what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 lines of code to do really complex responsive layouts. Not a big deal. Not including, you know, the TypeScript stuff. So how this works is, let me jump to app. So you got your on layout components. It's a stupid name. I just, you know, had to name something. Naming, one of the hardest problems in computer science, right? We're not doing science here. We're doing development. Design, like, give me a break. You can change the names later, whatever. So the idea here is like you pass in a function to the layout thing that gets the layout props, or the updated layout. So all React Native views and React Native Web views have an onLayout property, which is an event that fires every time its layout changes. But if you listen to that and re-render on every single layout change, it's like really expensive and gross. So I just did, the laziest thing possible, and I have a handle layout function that sets the state of this instance of the onLayout component to whatever the results of your layout thing are, given the actual layout data and the current state. So, and then when it actually renders the children, it does a render prop. When it renders the children, it just passes in the current state, and that's it. That's all you get. So the upshot of that is that with just this tiny little bit of code here, you can define skinny equals skinny, whatever that is. Maybe it's your mobile view or whatever, equals width is less than 600, but you can also do, let's see, yes, this does work, height, and then let's say short is equal to height less than, I don't know, 600. Stick with the 600 thing, and then save. And then short, let's add that here. And now let's see, short. What do we want to do with shortness? Let's just copy paste short, like render that is short. Alright, so short false. Okay, so alright, that's not gonna work because it's this giant full page thing, but whatever, you get the let's do I guess it's just more width stuff. Width is greater than wide. You need to just do some TypeScript stuff here so that it like auto completes the when you have a property here, it knows to find it here and all that jazz. But give me a break. So if width is greater than 1200, then it's wide. So wide and then short, underlined, yes. Yay! Now wide true, skinny true, wide true, skinny true, wide true, skinny true, wide true, skinny true. I don't know why that's so fun, but it is. So let's see. So wide, what are we gonna do with wide? Let's call this guy something else. Boom. So wide, or this is a really stupid thing to do. But whatever. Give me a break. Oh, okay. There we go. Alright, now his name changes if he's wide. Or if he's not wide. There we go. Yay! Whoopity-doo. There's your responsiveness. Are you convinced? Let's ship it! Right. Yeah. What else we got? I did some work on the button stuff. Didn't really do make a lot of progress on the button thing. Profile pic. So that's the thing. Oh yeah, the colors, define those here. So it's just, so I prefixed them with the name of what they are. So like quartz, what color is that again? Like kiwi. Wait, is kiwi's green or blue? Like I don't remember if they're green. Let's say green kiwi. And then like pitaya. What's a pitaya? It's red. Oh, okay. Oh, I can use that for my like error messages and stuff. Okay. You should probably have like the conceptual names of these things too, or like their semantic names like error color or error background button color, something like that. Maybe not. I don't know. And then like, oh yeah, how I defined the font stuff, text styles. So text styles are defined in a universal way, and they work across React Native and web. I'm using React Native web, and that's good. And that's all I got right now. So I'll see you later.